Hi, everyone. Welcome back to STEM Stories. I'm your host, Kelly. And just like last week, I wanted to remind all our viewers that if you have any questions for our guests this week, there's a link in the description of our video, and you can press that link and it'll take you to a form where you can submit your questions. So please don't be shy. This is about you and getting you the opportunity to ask questions. So please submit your questions throughout the talk, and then I can ask our guests. So I also want to do one other shout out before we begin. I understand that the TELUS Spark Science Center has a camp right now, and your campers are all watching. So hi to everyone over in Calgary at the TELUS Spark Science Center, and I hope you enjoy our show. So this week, our guest is Julia Bramante. She's a lead scientist for the Marijuana Reference Laboratory at the Colorado Department of Public Health. So as you can imagine, her field is fairly new. So the work that she and her team is doing is being used to develop standards that go across industry, and it's being used by people around the world. So it's really exciting science. Recently as well, with the COVID-19 pandemic, her lab, parts of her lab have shifted to testing for COVID. So this really highlights how scientists in all sorts of different fields can use their skills in many ways, as well as to solve all sorts of different problems. I always like to give a little bit about our guests that are outside of science. And when Julia is not working in the lab, she likes to belly dance, which I know nothing about, so I'm excited to hear, and to do ceramics. So welcome, Julia. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that really great intro. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. Mm-hmm. So just to get started, how did you get started being interested in science?
Yeah, well, that actually stems back pretty far. So if I had to pinpoint a particular time when it really started resonating with me, I believe I was in 6th grade, and I had just taken a liking to some of my science courses, and I was fortunate enough to have a teacher who encouraged us to complete a science fair project and submit it to the science fair if we were interested. And so I did that. And at that point, it was really pivotal for me, where I worked on this project and I found it very interesting, and I really enjoyed putting together a big poster and presenting that to judges in the fair. And so after that point, I think I just continued on that path of really exploring different areas of science and taking different coursework as I got into high school. And so, yeah, I think that would probably be the point where I can really note that I took interest.
That's really cool. That's pretty grade 6, eh?
Yes, yeah.
I feel like it's true though. You have like a moment, and you know, it's exciting, and then you can keep going. Did you enjoy science in school?
I did, actually, yes. So I know that's not always the case, but I actually really did enjoy science classes. And again, I attribute that to having exceptional teachers. I was really very fortunate and blessed with that all through schooling. So yeah, I think that helps. Yeah.
Right on. So I didn't really introduce your educational background to be able to do the job you do. So what's your educational science background, and what's your experience with doing different types of science?
Yeah, so my background is that I have a bachelor's in science and chemistry. And then with that, I got minors in biology, mathematics, and Chinese. Oh, wow. And then something that isn't on there is I did take a lot of studio art when I was in college, but I didn't quite get a minor in that. And so in tandem with getting my education, I tried to make a point to get really involved in laboratories as much as I could. So while I was in school, I had worked in an immunology laboratory. I did some HIV research at the University Hospital Research Center near my school in Denver. That's where I went to college. And then while I was actually at my university, I also worked in a number of different laboratories for different professors. Two of the main ones I worked in were a microbiology microscopy laboratory, and then also towards the end of my education, I more focused in on chemistry because that was more related to my major. And so that research was closely related to organic synthesis. So a whole mixed bag, really. Yeah.
How do you feel that education has prepared you to do the work you're doing now?
So I really strongly feel that it's important to, of course, complete any classwork that you have in your education, and that gives a really great foundation. But I have found that, at least for myself, the most important thing is to really try to get hands-on experience. So sometimes that happens in laboratory classes that are offered with regular classwork. And then also, of course, if you're able to pursue any type of internship at a laboratory, that's really where you get a lot of that relevant hands-on experience, much like what you would experience in a professional position.
Right. So that's great. So it sounded like you did a bunch of different things, and I feel like, when I was an undergrad, I certainly didn't even realize that that was an opportunity. So did you have someone kind of like helping you navigate it, or were you just super curious and found it on your own?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point you make, because a lot of times I think it can be intimidating, and people also maybe just don't realize that if you express interest in a professor's work that they're doing, a lot of times they will want to engage you, and they will want to try to help mentor you into any type of position that makes sense. So again, I was pretty fortunate that when I was in high school, there was an elective course offered called Journal Club or something to that regard. And so
Okay.
the course focused on reading scholarly journal articles and just really teaching high school students how to actually approach a scientific journal article and comprehend what's written there. And then at the end of the course, we were encouraged to try to get an internship at one of the either university research laboratories or university hospital laboratories in Cleveland. That's where I went to high school. And so I was really fortunate to get a position at one of the laboratories there. So that's where I started doing some immunology research. And so that really started off by me just sending an email to one of the principal investigators whose lab work I had read about online and I thought sounded interesting. And I said, hey, I read about this. And if you express interest and show that you've at least looked into what they do, that's usually a good place to start. And then I said, I would love to have the opportunity to come tour your lab and maybe see if I can do an internship. And so that worked out. And that, of course, was with the support of those teachers of that elective class. So that was Jacob Scott and Nikolai Sopko, who I actually still know to this day and interact with. So I think that will tie into probably some conversation later about really maintaining your network and your connections as you go through life. It's really important. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that, again, like, that's super early to have that experience. So that's really cool. I think certainly it's a lot of people don't realize that you can do those things in high school even.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. So I kind of mentioned at the beginning that your lab has shifted to testing for COVID-19. I was wondering, like, what your thoughts are on this, because it obviously disrupts maybe the stuff that you're actively working on, but also like what you think you or maybe your team have benefited from that shift.
Yeah, I think that's a really very important question. So I work for the Colorado State Public Health Laboratory. So as Kelly, you mentioned, the laboratory I work in within that overarching lab is the Marijuana Reference Laboratory, but our laboratory houses many different programs to help support health and safety measures and environmental considerations within Colorado. And so, of course, one of those programs is for molecular biology, including monitoring for flu, West Nile virus, things like that. And so when the COVID pandemic broke out, our laboratory became responsible for much of that response, and also a huge portion of the testing in Colorado. And so in order to adequately respond to this sudden demand that the entire globe was really trying to tackle, they had reassigned many people within our laboratory building to help with that COVID response, while we're trying to get more people hired in to then eventually permanently be the ones responsible for conducting that testing. And so I think it was a really great experience for everyone, because while it's of course extremely stressful, and on top of it being stressful work and very busy, you also have this pandemic happening around you, and people's lives have been very shifted. And so even amid that, what I think was really great for everyone is that a lot of people came together and just helped one another and came together as a team. And there were many people who were put into positions to help that were completely outside of their normal job duties, and people really just took it in stride and recognized it was kind of our opportunity to help. And I think it also drove home that we do work in public health. And so while a lot of times you can work with public health for even, decades and not have something like this occur, when it does occur, it's absolutely within our role to do whatever we can to aid in that response. So yeah, it was definitely a big learning experience and bonding experience, and it still is. It's still going on. So a lot of people have started to try to move back to their regular job duties, but there's still an enormous amount of COVID testing being conducted.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so although it's super interesting, I kind of want to delve a bit more into it. We do have some questions from our viewers, and I think that's more important at this point. So our first question is from Lola, and they're age 12. And their question is, did you ever have an interest outside of STEM? So for our viewers, being science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yes, that is a very inquisitive question. And yes, absolutely. So I briefly mentioned it earlier, but I took quite a bit of studio art when I was even in college. And then that was something that was really important to me when I was in high school as well. So I really was very drawn to doing ceramics and sculptural art. And that is something that to this day I find a lot of catharsis and a lot of connection with. And I think it's really important. Having any type of creative outlet or any interests that maybe even have nothing to do with science on the surface, I think are really important to have in your life. And a lot of times, those interests will end up complementing you in your profession, even in science, in ways you don't anticipate, and vice versa. And so I think if you are interested in other fields, or if you are feeling yourself pulled into other fields, or maybe have put a lot of time and dedication into a different area of study, and then you're feeling like you should go into science, just really follow whatever is most intriguing you, because I think that will always set you on the right path. That's what I would have to say. So, yeah.
Do you have any examples, like how has art helped your science career?
Yeah, well, I have the opinion that science is actually a very creative field. And when you're working on something like a really difficult method development project, and let's say you come to an obstacle during that method development, and you're trying to figure out how to accomplish what you need to accomplish in that method, having a really strong creative intuition can really help you through those situations. And so when you do have other interests and maybe some creative interests as well, that are helping you strengthen and just trust that intuition, I think it directly helps you navigate those other situations. I know it's not a really specific example, but that's more of a conceptual overarching example.
For sure, though.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. You're kind of tying creativity into problem solving and having the confidence to just try something different.
Absolutely. And then vice versa. Let's say I'm working on building some type of sculptural pot, and I want to make sure it's very precise in certain areas. Having the discipline of sitting in a laboratory on the bench and doing a repetitive motion over and over can actually help that process as well, because you're sitting there and you want to do the same exact motion or building technique over and over to make that sculpture. So I think it goes both ways. Yeah, there's definitely elements in all different fields. So
cool. So we have another question from one of our viewers. This is from Amy, age 11, and they want to know what's in your background behind you.
Yeah, I know, it's pretty exciting. I was hoping someone would ask. So that is actually just a creative, 3D image that someone made online of a THC molecule. So that's tetrahydrocannabinol. So you can kind of see there's the chain at the end, and yeah, you can get a better view of it if I move from side to side.
So that's the chemical that, or one of the chemicals, I should say, that you study a lot.
Exactly. Yes, it's one of the major constituents in cannabis. So
right on.
Quite a bit.
So another question from a viewer. This is from Devin, age 14. What is something that surprises you about your job?
I think something that surprises me would be how much innovation and just constant advancement we see in this field. It is very new, and there's a lot that hasn't been maybe set into stone yet. And so that provides this field where you can really explore a bit more than you could if, let's say, you went into a food testing laboratory. A lot of those protocols are already established, and you really just kind of follow a recipe. And in our field, since again it's new and you don't always have a direct recipe to follow in your laboratory, you do have to, back to that creative conversation, come up with methods quite often. And so seeing what people come up with to approach various problems is really fascinating and sometimes surprises me. So.
That's really cool. So this is another question from a viewer. They didn't leave their name, but what other science projects have you worked on?
Okay. Well, let's see, which one do you think within relation to my current job or maybe outside of this job? Is that what?
Maybe let's start in relation to your current job, and then we can kind of.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one major project that we worked on was trying to evaluate and develop a method for analyzing mold samples within cannabis. And so we really had to work on figuring out a way to not just screen or detect the mold, but also specifically identify it according to its species. So there's a type of pathogenic mold called Aspergillus. And so there's a few different subspecies of Aspergillus that are of particular interest. And so we worked on developing a PCR, so polymerase chain reaction screening method, which is really a long way to say a method that looks for certain DNA in samples to try to identify those different fungal species. So that's one project we worked on here. And then let me think of a different project I could bring up. Yeah, it's been a while. So when I was doing HIV research, we were looking at blood samples from individuals who were not infected with HIV versus individuals who were infected with HIV. And then we would take a type of bacteria and subject those blood samples to the bacteria to see what the differences in immune response were. So your immune cells are what are responsible for attacking anything foreign that enters your body. So we looked to see if there were differences between individuals not infected with HIV versus those who were in response to the same exact foreign material. So maybe a different one. I hope that.
Yeah, that's a broad range of topics, but it kind of ties into the next question we have from a viewer. Can what you work on be used for medicine?
Yes, absolutely. So not in the sense that we're doing clinical trials here or anything like that. That's not quite our role, but a lot of the methods that we work on developing help to support then methods to be used to determine what, let's say, the dose in a certain medication would be, or to verify that a certain batch of medicine isn't contaminated with microbes or other chemical contaminants. So those would be some examples of maybe where it would apply there.
So really your work is super interdisciplinary in that way. Like you can probably read science in other fields to use in your own work, as well as your work contributes to other fields.
Yes, exactly.
I don't think that that's a super common, I mean, it is common throughout science, but it sounds like yours is very applicable cross-disciplinary. So that's very cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, again, the nature of the industry being really new, but it has cross-disciplinary elements, certainly.
So unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to wrap this up a little bit, but I just want to ask you one more question. And that's really if you could summarize what your advice would be to someone who's interested in getting into science. What's something tangible that they can do today or, in the short term that can help them?
Yeah, so one piece of advice I have would be to read into what's interesting you. So if there's something that you've found in science that you really think piqued your interest, don't hesitate to just do a search online and see maybe what research is being done related to that, what might be going on with it. Something else I would recommend is seeking out resources that you may have access to. So if your school offers assistance to do a science fair, maybe look into that and try it out and just see if you like it. If you do feel inclined to try to reach out to a research professor to see if you can tour a laboratory, that can help as well. So really anything that can help you explore different areas of science and look at different professions as well as opportunities that may be available to you. I think that will also help you then understand what it is that does interest you most, and you can focus yourself that way. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's great advice. And I also just wanted to say to any of our viewers that our initiative, the Girls Initiative that runs STEM Stories, ran an online science fair recently. And tons of kids participated in that. And so that's a great, just echoing what you just said, it's a great way to figure out if the scientific method and scientific principles are something that interests you. So
Yeah, I think that's great. That's good to hear. And yes, that's absolutely an example. So
cool. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for joining us and talking about your breadth of experience. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. And we have another show next Thursday at 1:00. So please tune in then.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, Julia. Bye.
Thanks for having me.